Hey everyone, host of Shelves, Jeremy Meyer here. If you like the podcast, I thought I'd recommend a couple others for you. If you want to hear more about unproduced scripts, check out Screenplay Archaeology. If you want to hear some other movie or entertainment related discussion, check out the Entertainment Buffet podcast. If you're interested in some video game discussion, check out my friends over at the Darkcast and darkstation.com. Also be sure to visit some of our friends of the show, the Nerds and Marks podcast and 616 Entertainment. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Shelved podcast. This is actually episode 50, so I just want to, thank everybody who's been listening so far and who's managed to stick around for this journey. I know this episode was actually like a long time coming because I've been pretty silent for the last month. I did post my one update video, which kind of explains, where the episodes have been. Basically, I've been working, like my day job. It's been like 2 weeks straight of just 80-hour weeks, so it's been a little busy. I didn't really find the time to get the episodes together that I wanted. Excuse me while I take a drink. But I wanted to do a special episode for episode 50, and I didn't want to kind of just half-ass it and put it out when I was tired and didn't have the energy to actually do what I wanted to do. And I want this to be kind of a fun and interesting episode because, throughout the course of the podcast, we've mostly focused on, some fun little movie bits here and there, but also just covering, the scripts that were never made and talking about those scripts, and they've basically just been reviews, and I've never really dived into the actual writing of a screenplay because, that's not generally what this podcast is about. It was more just about like, here's these movies we could have had, or like, thank God we didn't get this movie, or, things like that. And I've managed to have some interviews with some people, which is a lot of fun, and I'm trying to get more of those in the future. But I did want to actually kind of take some time and just look at the writing of a screenplay because I am a writer myself and a aspiring screenwriter. During this time of this podcast, I've been working on, a lot of my own things that hopefully one day will turn into something and I can talk about. But I have had a couple people comment me and ask about writing a screenplay and, people who are interested in how it works. So what I thought would be fun would be to sit down and look at 3 different movies, and I pick some movies that, for one, are movies that I am a fan of, or movies that I'm pretty sure most people who are listening to this podcast have seen, just to make it a little easier. And I, kind of was going back and forth on a lot of different movies, but the 3 I landed on are The Dark Knight Rises, David Fincher's Gone Girl, and Avengers Infinity War. And 2 superhero movies, it's like, how different could they be? But I chose Avengers Infinity War specifically because a lot of people might look at that movie and be like, oh, this was a movie built out of a 10-year thing and had so many characters. A lot of people went into that movie wondering like, oh, how are they going to make this work with all these characters? And I think the way they did it is actually super interesting, and I listened to the commentary and I learned a lot. And that was kind of one of the things that gave me the idea for this podcast. Honestly, if you want the best film school you can get, I would just say dig out every DVD and Blu-ray in your collection and just listen to the audio commentary track. It's one of the things that got me so in deep into the idea of oh, maybe I could write a movie one day. So, if you really want to learn how the movie making process works, I think it's one of the best things that you can do just right in your home. Just go through your collection and grab whatever Blu-rays you have and watch the commentary. So, I kind of just wanted to share my process of when I'm going to write a script or if I'm going to start a script, what is that process like. And it's it's going to be different for everybody. I'm not saying this is the way you should do it. I've been working on my own stuff, but I've never sold a script. I have never had a movie made, so there's no reason why you should take my opinion. But maybe something that I say gets you on the right track and, at least gets you, motivated to kind of learn what to do for yourself. And, maybe this is the thing that'll kind of get you involved. And, if I can be that one thing that's going to get you to get off your ass and go write your first screenplay, then, that's awesome. And I look at that as a victory. Part of this was inspired by, I would look around and see people that I follow that I greatly admire, and people commenting to them of I have a really great idea for a movie. Will people buy ideas? Or, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I'm not saying this to be like an asshole or anything, but that kind of shit always just drives me crazy, because everybody wants to be the one that I sold my idea and stuff like that. And honestly, that's just not how it's going to work. You're probably not going to be that special person that just got lucky and, did it the easy way. It's going to take a lot of hard work. So, something that it's something that I struggled with too. And, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to start out, and I'm actually going to be referencing this book throughout the podcast, is I'm going to recommend a book. And it's the book, there are some people in the industry that may, I feel like I've heard talk of people taking shots at this of that's what amateurs do. But everybody's got to fucking start somewhere. So, and you shouldn't let anyone else's opinion of something color your experience. So the book that was recommended to me, and is kind of the thing that I read that, made it all make sense to me. I started writing my first screenplay blind, and didn't know what I was doing, but I had this idea, and ideas are a dime a dozen. And I started writing it, and then I was introduced to a friend of mine, Jeff Stolhand, who has been on the show and has been somebody who has helped me a lot through all of this. And he recommended a book to me, and that book is called Save the Cat, the last book on screenwriting that you'll ever need. And it's by Blake Snyder. And the one thing that, in particular in this book that really helped me understand how to write a screenplay is on page 70 of this book, which I have open and will be referencing throughout this episode, is called the Blake Snyder Beat Sheet. Now, Blake Snyder, you may know as the writer of a movie called Blank Check. And he references that multiple times throughout the book, which is kind of fun. It's a movie I grew up watching a lot. But what the beat sheet is it's a breakdown of a screenplay, as it says, beat by beat, and there are 15 of them. And it's also listed with page numbers. So one of the things I do is once I have an idea for, a movie, or I have a thought, is the first thing I'll usually do is write a log line, which the log line is the single sentence definition of a movie. Here, I will pull up the log line for Gone Girl just to give you an example. And you can actually do this yourself if you just go to IMDb, which I am doing right now as I talk, and the description of the movie is called the log line. And that's the thing. It's the kind of the one sentence line that's gonna sell your movie, basically. So the log line for Gone Girl is, with his wife's disappearance having become the focus of an intense media circus, a man sees the spotlight turned on him when it's suspected that he may not be innocent. So there you go. That's the one sentence that tells you what your movie's about, And something that I learned is a good log line kind of has a twist in it. And so you see a man's wife goes missing, and then the twist is, oh, maybe he's not so innocent. You want a little bit of irony in your log line, because it's one sentence that's describing your movie. So I'll come up with a log line first and be okay, if this is interesting, then I'll start fleshing out this idea and see what's there. So I'll start taking notes, And, I'll take as much notes as I can. I'll sit down on my phone and just type out like almost the entire plot if I can, preferably. But, I'll take as many notes as I can and, come back to it until I feel like I have a solid idea. So then I go to my beat sheet. And again, so I have like an open save file on my phone that just has all of these beats written down, and I try to break my story into these beats. And this is what we're going to be doing over the course of this episode. So like, first of all, if you want to get into screenwriting and you want to learn how to do it, here's what you do. Read this book, watch as many movies as you can, and read as many scripts as you can. And that was one of the things that kind of got me on this podcast in the first place, was reading scripts and, finding some that, for movies that were never made and thinking that would make a cool idea for a podcast. But that came from me just doing research of like screenwriting. So I'm going to run down these beats here and, kind of give a little bit of information about each one. And I will actually read little sections from this book just so you can understand, it's coming from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. So the first beat is your opening image. First, I'll just run down the beats. So number 1, it's your opening image, and that obviously is your first page. So the next one is theme stated, and that comes on page 5. And then the third beat is the setup, and this is the first 10 pages. Number 4 is the catalyst, and that comes on page 12. Number 5 is debate, and that's pages 12 through 25. Number 6 is break into 2, which is breaking into your second act, which is on page 25. Number 7 is your B story. That's on page 30. 8 is described as fun and games, and this is page numbers 30 through 55. And then on page 55 is beat number 9, your midpoint. And then from 55 to 75 is beat number 10, bad guys close in. Number 11 is all is lost on page 75. Number 12 is Dark Night of the Soul, pages 75 through 85. And then on page 85, we break into our third act. Number 14 is the finale, which is 85 through 110, because, your average screenplay is like 110 pages. Obviously, things will be different depending on the movie. And number 15 is your final image, 110. So that's your final page. So these are the beats I have, I have it written down, and I try to fit my screenplay into those beats. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take our 3 movies, and we're just going to see how they all break into, these beats. And this is something I do now every time I watch a movie. Something I even started doing is I cut the audio out of a bunch of movies and put them on my iPod, and I listen to them while I'm at work. And like every now and then when like I think a beat is like changing, I'll look at the time code on the movie that I'm listening to, and I'll see like, oh yeah, that's right around the 55-minute mark, So I see how the movie fits in. So, it's one thing is you always have to be doing research. Like even when you're just watching a movie, it's like, it's almost fun. It's like a game to me to kind of analyze it. And it's one of those things where it's like, especially when you're listening to it or watching it on like an iPhone or an iPad or something, and you can see the time code, or on Netflix, it's one of those like fun things to try to figure out and break down how a movie works. And then you can take what you learn and bring it to your own movie or your own script. All right. So the first movie we're going to start with is The Dark Knight Rises. And our first beat is the opening image. So obviously, what is the opening image? It's, and I'm going to read from the book here, the first couple sentences. The opening image is the very first impression of what a movie is. Its tone, its mood, the type and scope of the film are all found in the opening image. So essentially, you want something that's like the first thing somebody sees is what's going to set the tone for the movie. Or, it's something that's going to be interesting and just grab the viewer, so immediately they're hooked. All the Dark Knight movies kind of have the like fiery opening with like the bat logo inside it, and they're all stylized in different ways. Like in the third one, it's frozen because like, the movie, a big chunk of it is in ice. Very wintry Gotham. Excuse me while I take some water throughout this. Yeah, and then, it cuts immediately to the poster of Harvey Dent, and we're left with the memories of what happened at the end of the last film, which, you know, The Dark Knight, Harvey Dent dies. And as you know, it kind of sets the dour tone for The Dark Knight Rises, because The Dark Knight Rises is a more, you know, downtrodden story. It's watching Batman be destroyed, essentially. And that leads us to our beat of The Dark Knight Rises, which I actually have some conflict with this one. Christopher Nolan actually, let me see if I can pull this up. He describes the theme of The Dark Knight Rises a little differently than the way I see it. And I know it says it in the IMDb trivia, so I want to find the quote. But there's a line in the movie, and so if you remember the opening scene of The Dark Knight Rises, it's Bane and his men on the plane taking it down in like a really great opening scene. And one of the reasons I chose The Dark Knight Rises is because I do feel like it so perfectly fits into the formula of this movie, and maybe that, or I'm sorry, the formula of this beat sheet. And maybe that's because it is kind of one of the weaker movies of the trilogy. But it was one of those things where I was like listening to the movie, I was like, oh, it kind of like, okay, yeah. So Christopher Nolan said that the film, this is from the IMDb trivia, Christopher Nolan said that the film's theme deals with pain. For Batman Begins, it was fear, while The Dark Knight deals with chaos. And pain, obviously, coming from, the broken back, watching his city be torn apart. That is the theme of the movie. And even the theme of the villains is the pain of Talia al Ghul and Bane avenging Ra's al Ghul. And you can see how, that theme runs throughout the movie. But, there's a great line in the beginning of the movie that, to me, because I think fear does play a part of the theme in Dark Knight Rises. And when Bane has the Dr. Pavel on the rope when they're going to launch out of the plane, he says, "Now is not the time for fear. That comes later." And this line is almost exactly at the 5-minute mark, which is, and I guess I should say, when I say 5-minute mark and counting the times, the rule of thumb for a screenplay is each page represents like a minute of the film. And obviously this is not going to be 100% of the time, but, movies are going to be longer than the screenplays according to minute count and page count. But, the general rule of thumb, and you'll find these beats, even if they are not exactly at the 55-minute mark or whatever, they will be pretty close. So as I said, theme stated is somewhere in the first 5 minutes of a well-structured screenplay, someone, usually not the main character, will pose a question or make a statement, usually to the main character. That is the theme of the movie. Be careful what you wish for. This person will say, be careful what you wish for, this person will say, or pride goeth before a fall, or family is more important than money. It won't be this obvious. It will be conversational and offhand remark that the main character doesn't quite get at the moment, but what will have far-reaching and meaningful impact later. Another example of this is in a screenplay that I am currently writing. On the 5th page, the character walks out of her apartment, and on the wall is a calendar that says every day is a new day. And, kind of implying this character's inability to, move on with her life and things like that. It's, a quote on the wall that she continuously ignores. And the screenplay really points that out. And you have to realize when you're writing a screenplay, you're writing, you might want to write it like a book, but you are writing something for a visual medium. You want to think of how it's going to be seen by your audience. You got to write it down as if somebody is seeing it. So that's, something to keep in mind. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next beat, which is the first 10 pages, which is my favorite part of a screenplay to write, which is the setup. So reading from the book, the first 10 pages of the script, or first dozen pages at most, is called the setup. If you're like me, and like most readers in Hollywood, this is the make or break section where you have to grab me or risk losing my interest. Think of all the good setups you've seen in the first reel, the first 10 minutes, which sets up the hero, the stakes, the goal of the story, and does so with vigor. The setup is also the place where, if you're me, the writer, I make sure I've introduced or hinted at introducing every character in the A story. Watch any good movie and see, within the first 10 minutes, you meet or reference them all. Make sure by your page 10 you have done the same. So again, The Dark Knight Rises, our first 10 minutes, we see the party at Bruce's mansion. The first 10 minutes we get Bane on the plane, so we're introduced to Bane, and we learn about him through the cop that's like bringing in the men. We find out that Bruce Wayne is a recluse, and he has been, and that Jim Gordon is pretty much on his way out as police commissioner. This is all in the first 10 minutes. And then we're introduced to Alfred giving Selina Kyle the tray to go into Bruce's room. And this actually leads us to our 12th page, the catalyst, which is Selina stealing the pearls. Now, let me pull up the catalyst section of the book. Okay. Catalyst, page 12. The package that arrives in Romancing the Stone, which will send Joan Wilder to South America. The telephone call that informs Tom Cruise his father has died in Rain Man. The dinner at which Reese Witherspoon's fiancé announces he's dumping her in Legally Blonde. These are the catalyst moments. Telegrams, getting fired, catching the wife in bed with another man, news that you have 3 days to live, the knock at the door, the messenger. In the setup, you, the screenwriter, have told us what the world is like, and now in the catalyst moment, you knock it all down. Boom. One that just popped into my head as I was reading this is Old School. In the movie Old School, the catalyst would be when he walks in on his wife, in an orgy. And, that's where everything changes in that movie. It's the moment that basically gets the adventure going. So Bruce Wayne would still be a recluse if Selina Kyle didn't come in and steal those pearls in the beginning of that movie. It's the thing that, starts him to get investigating her. He goes down in the Batcave and he starts, trying to figure her out, which leads us into the debate. So in the book, the debate section, pages 12 through 25. This is a section of the script between pages 12 and 25 that used to really baffle me. When the telegram comes on page 12 informing me that my sister is being held by pirates, I know what I have to do. So why do I, the writer, have to vamp up to the act break until my hero does what he's supposed to do? The debate section is just that, a debate. It's the last chance for the hero to say, this is crazy, and we need him or her to realize that. Should I go? Dare I go? Sure, it's dangerous out there, but what's my choice? Stay here? So basically, the debate in The Dark Knight Rises is Bruce Wayne looking up Selina Kyle and kind of trying to figure out what he wants to do with her. We also meet the cop, Edward Blake, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I think it's Ed. It's Blake. I can't remember the first name. We meet him, and he's, going around talking to the kids, and everybody's like, oh, we need the Batman. And, he goes to see Bruce at the mansion. Is like, we need the Batman. And, all of this is just building to Bruce realizing that he needs to come back. I think another part during this movie is, Bruce going to meet Selina and, getting the pearls back, and they have a little bit of a dialogue. Like, all of this is just kind of like the thing pushing him towards the second act. And I think The Dark Knight Rises does a good job of this section. It's a section of a script that I struggle with the most. Is like kind of the transition into the second act and the transition into the third act are always my two biggest difficult moments. So then we do break into our second act in The Dark Knight Rises, and that would be the action scene at the bar when Selina Kyle brings the fingerprints to the goons, and that kind of leads to the firefight that leads into the sewer that leads Gordon into Bane. So let's take a look at the book. Break into 2 on page 25. Okay, so reading from the book. It happens on page 25. I have been in many arguments. Why not page 28? What's wrong with 30? Don't. Please. In a 110-page screenplay, it happens no later than 25. Page 25 is the place where I always go to first in a screenplay someone has handed me. We all have our reading quirks. To see what happens on page 25, I want to know, 1, if anything happens, and 2, if the screenwriter knows that something should happen, and I mean something big, because that's what's supposed to happen on 25. As discussed above, the act break is the moment where we leave the old world. the thesis statement behind and proceed into a world that is the upside down version of that. It's antithesis. But because of these two worlds are so distinct, the act of actually stepping into Act 2 must be definite. So, yeah, it's, it needs to be a big thing. Like, this is the thing that's going to change everything. So before this, the Gotham police look at Gotham as, it's a city that's safe now. There is no crime. There's the line from Joseph Gordon-Levitt that, soon police are going to be chasing down overdue library books. But, something has happened. They have the firefight that leads into the sewers, and Gordon has encountered Bane, and, something big is going on in Gotham. So, things have changed. Like, it's time for things to happen. So now we kind of have our B story here. So this is on page 30, and in the book, the B story begins on page 30. And the B story of most screenplays is the love story. It is also the story that carries the theme of the movie. I also think that the start of the B story, what takes place around page 30, is a little booster rocket that helps smooth over the shocking obvious A story act break. Think about it. You've set up the A story, you've put it in motion, now we've had the abrupt jump into Act 2, and you've landed in a whole new world. The B story says, enough already. How about talking about something else? Which is why the cutaway is usually in line with the A story, but new in scope. Again, the B story is something I always kind of have trouble with. To me, a good B story is something that ties into the plot, but maybe in a less obvious way. I'm trying to think of a movie that, like, perfect. Like, I love a B story that is, it seems almost pointless to the story, and then ends up wrapping around towards the end in the most important way. I mean, now, to me, the B story of Dark Knight Rises, again, it's one of the things in the movie I'm a little less clear on, but I put it as Selina looking for the clean slate. And, Bane is underground, leading the cops to investigate the underground, and Bruce's run-ins with Selina. So that, to me, is kind of the B story. And, as the book says, the love story, Selina is kind of the love interest of the movie. And as the B story is generally started on page 30, the fun and games section also begins on page 30 and leads to 55. So, we got the section of, Selina breaking into, what's his name? Daggett's house to find the clean slate. During this section, we also have Bane breaking into the stock exchange and leading to the chase from that. And we also have Bruce Wayne going around and kind of gathering up his equipment. He goes to meet Fox. He goes to the doctor and talks to Gordon. All this stuff is kind of in the fun and games section. So the book, as we've been using, describes the fun and games section as the fun and games section is the part of the screenplay that I like to say provides the promise of the premise. It is the core and essence of the movie's poster. It's where most of the trailer moments of a movie are found, and it's where we aren't as concerned with the forward progress of the story. The stakes won't be raised until the midpoint, as we are concerned with having fun. The fun and games section answers the question, why did I come see this movie? What about this premise? This poster, this movie idea is cool. When you, the development executive, ask for more set pieces, this is where I put them, in the fun and games. So yeah, as I said, there's the action scene at the stock exchange, and, this section ends with our midpoint on page 55, which is the return of Batman. Which is crazy to think when you look at The Dark Knight Rises, Batman doesn't come in until the midpoint. But it would also be the same if you were doing an origin story. If you think back to Batman Begins, the scene where Batman probably picks up the mob guy and says, I'm Batman, probably comes at the midpoint, at page 55 and, an hour into the movie. All right, so now we are at the midpoint of the movie and of our script. And what exactly is the midpoint? Well, the midpoint should come on page 55, as I was saying. And there are two halves in a movie script where the midpoint... There are two halves in a movie script, and the midpoint on page 55 is the threshold between them. We can talk about the importance of the two act breaks, but to me, the midpoint is as important, especially in the early going on laying out of a script. God, I'm having so much trouble reading. Going of laying out a script's beats. I have found in reviewing hundreds of movies that a movie's midpoint is either an up, where the hero seemingly peaks, though it is a false peak, or down, where the world collapses all around the hero, although it is a false collapse. And it can only get better from here on out. When you decide which midpoint your script is going to require, it's like nailing a spike into a wall good and hard. The clothesline that is your story can now be strung securely. So again, the midpoint of The Dark Knight Rises is Batman Returns. And not the movie Batman Returns, but Batman in The Dark Knight Rises returns from his 8-year-long hiatus from crime. The criminals attack the stock exchange and Batman returns. So it's an up, but as they said, it's a false up, because what do we know is coming is, Batman's going to get fucked up in this movie. So that leads us into our next section, pages 55 through 75. The bad guys close in. So the section of script from page 55 to 75, the midpoint to All Is Lost, is the toughest part of the screenplay. That's a hard bit of truth for you. It never fails to be the most challenging for me, and there's no method to get through it other than to just muscle your way through. This is where your skills as a bullhead come in handy. The term bad guys close in applies to the situation the hero finds himself in at midpoint. All seems fine, but even though the bad guys, be they people, a phenomenon, or a thing, are temporarily defeated and the hero's team seems to be in perfect sync, we're not done yet. This is the point where the bad guys decide to regroup and send in a heavy artillery. It's the point where internal dissent, doubt, and jealousy begin to disintegrate the hero's team. So if you think of The Dark Knight Rises, so Batman comes back at the midpoint, and everything after that would be bad guys closing in. So we get the scene where Batman, rescues Selina on the roof of Daggett's building, and they fight and run away as Bane's men close in. And then this all leads to the confrontation with Bane. It's everything from there. It's, Bruce meeting Selina, Bruce losing all of his money and everything in his house because of the transactions that were made at the stock exchange. His world is falling down around him. The bad guys are closing in. And then this leads us to our All Is Lost moment on page 75, which is... Sorry, I'm starting to wonder if my notes... I thought my notes were a little different. Okay. So yeah, this leads us to our All Is Lost moment. So where Batman fights Bane and gets his back broken. So in All Is Lost, as addressed above, the All Is Lost point occurs on page 75 of a good, well-structured screenplay. We know it is the opposite of the midpoint in terms of an up or a down. So there you go. The midpoint, Batman is coming back. The All Is Lost moment, page 75, is the opposite. Batman gets his back broken. It is also the point of the script most often labeled false defeat. For even though all looks black, it's just temporary. But it seems like a total defeat. All aspects of the hero's life are in shambles. Wreckage abounds, no hope. Yeah, Batman gets his back broken. It's pretty hard. And then Bane continues to rub it in his face by showing him, look where we've made our home underneath Wayne Tower. And, they raid his armory. And then, from that point on, Dark Night of the Soul. So now you're in the middle of a death moment at the All Is Lost point. But how does your character experiencing this moment feel about it? The question is answered in a section of the screenplay I call Dark Night of the Soul. It can last 5 seconds or 5 minutes, but it's in there, and it's vital. It's the point, as the name suggests, that is the darkness right before the dawn. Haven't heard that in a Batman movie before. It is the point just before the hero reaches way deep down and pulls out his last best idea that will save himself and everyone around him. But at that moment, the idea is nowhere in sight. So what happens? Bane drags Bruce Wayne over to the pit that, he was raised in and leaves him there with a television to watch as Gotham tears itself apart and burns its way down. And, what does he leave him with is, once your city is ashes, then you have my permission to die. All it is just beating Batman into the ground and, making sure that, he's feeling a dark night of the soul. And I'm not meaning for so many Batman references in all of this. But as I said, it fits almost perfectly. Even the title just fucking lends itself to this formula. So then on page 85, we break into 3. Act 3, that is. Huzzah! The solution. Thanks to the characters found in the B story, the love story, thanks to all the conversations discussing theme in the B story, and thanks to the hero's last best effort to discover a solution to beat the bad guys who have been closing in and winning in the A story, lo, the answer is found. So the B story doesn't so much play into the A story in The Dark Knight Rises as this book is hinting at. And as you can see, you know, it's not the fucking formula that you completely have to follow letter by letter to write a perfect screenplay. But, you know, it's just the formula. So, you know, what happens during this time is Bruce is watching everything on the television and he's getting angry, and, you know, he gets his back fixed, and he starts working out and spends the months building his body back up and trying to make the attempt to escape the pit. And, you know, during that time, Selina is in the city, and Morgan Freeman, Lucius Fox, is in the city, and Gordon is in the city, and, you know, they're trying to pull everything together. And, you know, that's kind of where the B story is. And then what happens on page 85, but breaking into Act 3, Bruce Wayne escapes from the pit. And so now we're into our third act where, you know, Batman's going to return to the city and fucking lay waste. And now that brings us into page 85 through 110 is our finale. The finale is Act 3. This is where we wrap it up. It's where the lessons learned are applied. It's where the character ticks are mastered. It's where A story and B story end in triumph for our hero. It's the turning over of the old world and the creation of a new world order. All thanks to the hero who leads the way based on what he experienced in the upside-down, antithetical world of Act 2. So what happens? Batman comes back to Gotham. Him and Selina work together to defeat Bane and get the bomb out of the town, and, you know, all the cops who have been spending their B story, you know, trying to figure out what's going on with the city. They figure out which truck has the bomb, and they get the bomb out, and it blows up, and, you know, this leads us into our final image. So, you know, the Act 3, it's all the end. It's the wrap up. It's the action. It's the final action scene. And, you know, they change the world, as they say. You know, they free the cops, and the cops rise up and take down Bane and his mercenaries, changing this walled off city and liberating it. And as I said, final image, page 110. As stated earlier, the final image in a movie is the opposite of the opening image. It is your proof that change has occurred and that it's real. If you don't have the final image or you can't see how it applies, go back and check your math. There's something not adding up in Act 2. The final image of The Dark Knight Rises, you know, you can look at one of two moments. You could look at the moment with Michael Caine at the cafe and seeing Bruce across the way and smiling, or the literal final image of Joseph Gordon-Levitt now rising up as the new Batman. You know, it's the final image just as much as the opening image. It's something you should be left with when you leave the theater and be like, oh man, that image is just like something that sticks with me. And, you know, that's it. That's all she wrote. That's how the movie fits into the screenplay format. You know, and that's just one movie. And as I said, I like doing this when I watch movies now. I love just kind of going through films and seeing how they fit into this formula. And this is the formula that I use when I write my screenplays. And, you know, I break it down into these things, and, you know, you're gonna tinker with it. It's never just you're never gonna write it down the first time and that's gonna be it. On the screenplay I am working on currently, I got to about page 55 or so, and then I rewrote the entire thing. I think I kept like the first 5 pages, and everything from that was rewritten. And, you know, writing is always rewriting. That's something you need to learn. You're never going to write it once and be like, oh man, that was great. And, you know, it's going to sell for $1 million. Like that's never going to happen. You're going to go through fucking like 10 drafts of a script, maybe, you know, you never know. Okay, so I want to move on to the next movie now, which is Gone Girl, which is a personal favorite of mine. So we got our opening image, which is Something that sticks with me the most from the movie, honestly, is Rosamund Pike with her head on Ben Affleck's chest, and her, looking up to the camera with the whole speech of, when I look at my wife, I wonder, what are you thinking? What's going through your head and stuff? And, it's kind of a haunting image with that music. So that's our opening image. Page 5, we got our theme stated, which the theme for Gone Girl is dishonesty. And you get a little bit of that in the beginning is, he doesn't know what his wife is thinking. But at the 5-minute mark of the movie, it's actually almost exactly the 5-minute mark of the movie. It's the scene where they're in the elevator, and she's says that she finds him hard to believe. And he says, why? And she's like, I think it's your chin. And he's like, my chin? And he's like, all right. And so he covers up his chin with his fingers and says, no bullshit with you, ever. And obviously, if you know the story of Gone Girl, that's not true. But he's saying, he's never going to lie to her, which is dishonest, because then that's what ends up happening in the movie. So in our first 10 pages, we get our setup. We meet Ben Affleck and his sister. We're introduced to those characters. And then we get the first of Amy's diary entries, which tells us the story of how they met, of them at the party, them in the elevator, of him saying he would never lie to her and things like that. And then we get our catalyst. So Ben Affleck is at the bar. He gets the call from his neighbor that his cat got out. So he goes home and, sees that the house is a little tossed up and his wife is gone. So now this movie uses the debate section in a way that I think is really great. And if you're writing this kind of movie, it makes it super easy, because the debate section is actually an investigation. Ben Affleck calls the cops and they come over to his house and, they're investigating it and asking questions of, where is his wife? What happened to her? Which I think is a great use of the debate section. And I just love this movie. So, so our, page 25, we break into Act 2. They declare Amy is missing and they have a press conference. And they start the search. So again, with this movie, The B Story, I think this movie uses these things in a lot of good, interesting ways, because The B Story to me is the investigation. We get the scenes of the detectives investigating the house and, people searching and stuff. And this is also the fun and game section. They explore the house, they find the different clues that Amy leaves, and they track down the first clue to Ben's office. Ben tracks down the second clue to his parents' house, or his dad's house. And, we get some more diary entries about their marriage and, how their marriage is going through problems and, things like that. And this is also where we meet we find out the fact that, he's cheating on Amy. We get the press conference with, everybody kind of starting to assume that, something's going up with this guy, which leads us to the midpoint, in which is where Amy becomes the suspect. Like throughout the movie, we're thinking like, something happened to the wife and Ben Affleck, just wants to find her. What's going on? But all of a sudden the movie has changed. The world is flipped and Ben Affleck is now the suspect of her murder. And now we get our bad guys close in. We can hear Amy talking about Ben Affleck getting what's coming. Or wait, I'm sorry. Okay. So yeah, we get our, our bad guys close in. What we also find out at the midpoint is that Amy is still alive. So, Nick becomes the suspect, and then he figures out the final clue, which is, Anniversary 5 is wood, and he follows the clue to his sister's woodshed, where Amy has hidden all of these items and things that make it look like, he ran up the credit card debt, and basically painting him as a suspect. Then we also get the cut in the movie, which is showing that Amy is still alive, and she runs through how she faked everything. So the movie has become quite different. Yeah, and so now we get our bad guys close in section, which is Amy is on the run. Ben Affleck has to hire his lawyer. We hear a lot of talk of, Ben getting what's coming to him. He starts getting painted as a villain in the media, because the media is a thing that's used, pretty effectively in this movie. And, as this is all going on, Amy is following it on the news and loving it. And, this is a movie that's kind of colorful. I guess you could call Amy the villain of the movie. even though she is one of the main characters, she is a horrible, horrible person. And then, that leads us into page 75, All is Lost. So at this point, Amy is kind of taking control as the character of the story. Like, the first half of the movie is more Ben Affleck. The second half of the movie is more Rosamund Pike. She meets the hillbillies in Missouri, and they end up figuring out she has all this money, and they come in, they beat her and steal the money from her. So all is lost. Amy is left with no hope. So what does she do? She calls Neil Patrick Harris's character Desi. And she, her plan is kind of falling apart. And it's a fucking brilliant screenplay in the sense that, throughout the first half, we are following Ben Affleck's character, and then we switch to a new character and are still kind of hitting the beats of the script, because now, The Dark Night of the Soul is everything's falling apart for Amy. And, she has to call Desi, who was like this, crazy stalker boyfriend of hers from years ago. And now she's, tied up with him. And, I kind of geek out over how good this script is. So this is the whole section of her living in his house and kind of figuring out what's going on in his house. And then they watch the Ben Affleck on the news, and he does so well, and now he looks popular, and people are kind of wondering what's going on with Amy. And so she starts forming her new plan, which brings us into our break into Act 3, which is Amy kills Desi, which is Neil Patrick Harris. She, makes it look like she was raped, and, as they're having sex, she slits her throat in a very dark and fucked up move. That is one of my favorite parts of the movie. And then, what is the finale? Our last bit of the movie is Amy coming back to Ben Affleck, and at this point he knows what she did. Like, the whole part of like the last half of the movie for him is just like putting together her plan and trying to twist it around on her. And that's what the finale of the movie is, and it's not a happy finale. The movie has a horrible ending that I love. Like, I love that movies, can end kind of shitty, and shitty in the sense of a story, not shitty as in it's bad. But yeah, that's the movie just kind of spirals from there. It's her coming back, and essentially she gets away with it, and then she also tricks Ben Affleck into having a kid with her because, he had stored sperm. It was like a story in the movie kind of tucked away, and then she gets a baby implanted in him and stuff. And it's, our closing image is a mirror of the opening with the same dialogue, but now it has a whole new meaning. He talks about in the beginning, when I think about my wife, I think about her head and cracking it open. And now you look at that in a completely different connotation. What are you thinking? What have we done to each other is the dialogue. And that is one of my favorite things, when, you can take something and it runs throughout the movie and flip it into a whole new meaning. Like, I am such a fucking nerd for the screenplay of this movie. And honestly, if you want to, if you're interested in screenwriting, it's a script I highly recommend reading. It's easy to get a hold of. So I'm going to take a drink of water here, and then we're going to move on to our third movie. All right, so now we're going to talk about Avengers Infinity War, because this is a movie that I think is really interesting, because it's a movie you look at and it's like, oh, well, how did they write this script? Like, there's so much going on, and it's something that they said on the commentary that really made it click with me. And even though we heard it a lot in the marketing for the movie, it just didn't exactly click with me until I heard it straight from them. And is that even though Avengers is in the title, that movie is a Thanos movie. So Thanos is your main character. And, the Avengers, we all know the Avengers. We don't need to get to know them more, because we've gotten to know them for 10 years throughout, 20 films or whatever it is. So we know these characters. Our new character is Thanos and his, crew. And I just want to say, I could be wrong on a lot of these. This is the way that I have broken down the movie, and my word is not law. As I said, I am I am not a paid screenwriter, so why should you take my advice? I'm clearly reading stuff from a book that has helped me. And again, this is for people who, are kind of curious and just want to learn. And I wanted to show examples of different kinds of movies. So Infinity War, our opening image is Thanos on the destroyed Asgardian ship with his minions giving his sermon. We were left at the end of Thor Ragnarok with the ship closing in on them. And we open in Avengers with, the destroyed ship. And what I view as the theme of this movie is sacrifice and morality. And there's very clear instances of sacrifice in the first 5 minutes of this movie. One coming from Loki trying to kill Thanos, and the other from Idris Elba's character. What is his name? Can't remember. But sending the Hulk to Earth and, letting himself get killed. So our setup for the movie, this is the first 10 minutes, is Thanos getting the 2 stones. He has the purple stone already, and he gets the blue stone from Loki. And the Hulk getting sent to Earth, which leads us to our catalyst, which this is the moment that gets the plot going, which you could argue is Hulk being sent to Earth in Doctor Strange's house, or what I have listed is Doctor Strange going to talk to Tony Stark and bringing him to his home. And this leads into our debate, which is, them explaining to Tony who Thanos is and what's going on, and then Thanos' minions appearing along with Spider-Man, and their fight in the streets, which leads into our second act break, which is Tony and Spider-Man on the ship going into space. I don't know why I say Tony and Spider-Man. Tony and Peter, Iron Man and Spider-Man, whatever. And then we get our B story and this is the way I see it, because Vision does play kind of a major part in the story. But to me, the B story is Wanda and Vision, and also Gamora, like Gamora's knowledge of what she's hiding. I do kind of see this movie as having 2 B stories, but to me it's more, honestly, a C story if you really want to think about it with Thor. But again, it's really Thanos' story. So the B story is the stones, the other stones, which Vision has a stone, and then Gamora knows about where the one stone is. So we get our 30 through 55, our fun and game section, which the action scenes on the ship, and on the ship I mean with Doctor Strange and Tony Stark and Iron Man fighting the Squidward guy. Our action scene with Wanda and Vision against the other 2 minions is Captain America and Black Widow. I almost said Scarlet Witch. Black Widow show up, and then we also get our action scene with the Guardians on Nowhere. And at this time, we also get the flashback of young Gamora. And this brings us into our midpoint, which is when Gamora is taken by Thanos. So the fun and game section literally is like a ton of action scenes for this movie. So now we get our 55 to 75, which is our bad guys closing in section, which is Thor going to the forge to get his new weapon, and then Thanos taking Gamora to the planet to get the Soul Stone. And that leads us into our all is lost moment when Thanos throws Gamora off the cliff and gets the Soul Stone. And this leads us into the Dark Night of the Soul, which is, to me, the Avengers fighting on Titan, as well as the battle in Wakanda, which is, it's a pretty long movie. This section is kind of blown out in this movie, but it's clearly a losing battle in Wakanda, and then the Avengers straight up lose on Titan. And this is brings us into our third act, or our break into the third act, which is when Thanos gets the Time Stone. Something has changed drastically. So then we cut to our finale, which is the battle winding down in Wakanda, and then Thanos showing up and, just mowing down the Avengers until he gets to the last stone from Vision's head. Vision is killed by Wanda, and he rewinds time and takes the stone and completes the gauntlet. Thor stabs him in the chest, Thanos snaps his fingers, and half the universe disappears. And then we get our closing image, which is Thanos sitting on the porch, his job done. So you see that the way that movie fits into the formula is because Thanos is the main character. All of the beats are following Thanos' story. And, even though it's, maybe they should have called the movie Thanos Rising or something. But truly, even though it's an Avengers movie, it is a Thanos story. But yeah, that's kind of the 3 movies I wanted to run down. And again, this episode is simply, I guess, a little bit for educational purposes, but I don't want to be considered like, oh, this is how you do it, you should listen to me, blah, 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 because who the fuck am I, This is just the way that I look at it. And if you're interested in screenwriting and if it's something that you would like to do, then, first of all, get the book and read it. Get all the books you can. Read all of the scripts you can. Watch as many movies as you can. That's your best education. Watch all your director's commentaries. Even if you buy them on iTunes, a lot of those movies come with that now. But that, hopefully just anything that I've said would help inspire you to want to go out and do it. And that's what you have to do. You just have to go out and do it. I have friends that are, so farther ahead than I am and are actually doing their own thing. And it's always going to be hard to look at somebody and be like, oh man, I wish it was me and I want to be doing that. But, you just have to do your best, and it's just do it. That's the best advice I can give you, is just do it. Don't wait for anyone to do it for you. No one's going to tell your story. And screenwriting is all your personal take on the world or on this type of story. So sit down, learn how to type, and just take what's in you and put it on the page. And that's going to be it for today's episode. I hope this was helpful for anybody. I had a lot of fun kind of breaking down movies, and I would like to do this again. Like, if there's a movie that, if you want to hear it broken down, just let me know, and I'd love to do this again. I'll compile a list of more movies. Or if, this was just too much for your ears to hear, because what is this clown talking about, then I'm sorry I even did this. I wouldn't mind doing it again. So if there's other movies you want me to cover, just let me know. But in the meantime, be sure to check out the social media at Shelves Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to email me or have some questions or want me to talk about some different kind of movies and break them down by the scripts, shelvedfilmpodcast@gmail.com is the best way to get a hold of us. Me. I'm hoping this isn't the last episode of the year. I would like to get my Freddy vs. Jason episode out before the year ends, but that'll be the next episode, so keep your eyes open for that. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and go make your thing.